Hey, everybody, this is Marc Broussard. I am a singer from South Louisiana. I sing soul music, I sing blues music. Really, it's rhythm and blues. You're listening to Talkin' Blues.
Mark, I want to begin by asking you the significance of the movie Back to the
Yeah.
Future and what that meant to your musical journey.
Well, my father would book a family vacation for us every year in Florida to the beach. And to offset the cost of that vacation, he would also book a gig. And when I was 5.5 years old, I think Back to the Future had played on television the weekend before we left for that vacation. And I saw Marty McFly perform Johnny Be Good for the first time. I had never heard that song prior to that. And he also played a cherry red ES-335, very similar to a guitar that my father owned since he was 16 years old. My grandfather bought him a cherry red Gibson ES-335 in 1968. And I connected with the song. I kept repeating the hook over and over again. I just kept saying, Johnny Be Good. And my dad says, Mark, you want to learn that song? I said, of course. And the next day he went to work, came home with some lyrics printed out on the old dot matrix printer. I don't know why he printed it. He didn't print them for me because I couldn't read. I was 5.5 years old.
That's right.
Uh, but I've always had a really good memory, so it didn't take very long for me to memorize those lyrics. And as soon as I had the lyrics well in hand, my dad starts playing, and I start singing in key. And the first time through, he was really impressed, but he wanted to really test my abilities, and so we played it right again right away. And on the second verse, he modulated up a half step, and I followed him. And then on the third verse, he modulated up again another half step, and I followed him again. And so he put me on stage that next week when we went on family vacation. It was my first gig at 5.5 years old. So Back to the Future is critical in my story. It launched my career.
I'm curious, how much singing were you doing around the house before then? Like, did you show any interest in singing?
I don't really remember. I vaguely remember learning the song with my dad. And then the only other memory I have prior to that was when I was really, really, really young. I was probably about 17 months old. I was still in a diaper. And I was walking around. We were building a house. My father was a builder for most of his career. And he was building our family home, actually not too far from where I'm at right now. And he and his brother were doing some electrical work. His brother was installing these overhead lights in the living room, and I remember walking around. I had a pacifier in my mouth. I'm barefoot. I'm literally wearing nothing but a diaper, and I remember hearing my name. And I look up, and my uncle is looking at me through a hole in the sheetrock, and he's making crazy faces like, ah! And I remember kind of laughing a little bit. And then my dad continues that story that he lost track of me. He didn't know where I was. And he's looking around the job site for me. And he comes out the back door. And there were some people in the field behind the house at a horse barn. And they're hollering and they're pointing up. And he had a ladder leaning up against the patio roof. And he climbs the ladder. And I'm standing there on the patio roof. And he's like, "Hey, buddy, come here, come here." But yeah, I don't remember any of that. I almost died that day, apparently, because he chased me. He had to chase me up, and he caught me right at the peak of the roof. And if I'd have gone over that ridge, I would have fallen down onto the concrete in the front of the house.
Wow.
But I remember looking up at my uncle and kind of chuckling. That's the only other memory I have prior to 5.5 when I was on stage.
Well, let's talk about your dad because he plays a key role in this whole story,
Absolutely.
continues to, and I'm very interested in that. So tell me a little bit about Ted.
Well, my dad is the oldest son of a family of five. His father and mother were both born on houseboats in a swamp. And this is the swamp that was originally settled by the first Cajuns. There was a fellow named Joseph Beausoleil Broussard who was imprisoned by the British in Nova Scotia for about 6 weeks, and then told, "Here's a boat. Get on this boat and get the hell out of here with all your people." And so those first Acadians ended up sailing into the mouth of the Mississippi, talking to some French folks in New Orleans, looking for land and work. And they said, "There's sail the tributaries just to the west of here. There's a cattle baron in a place called Saint Martinville, Louisiana, who's probably going to be willing to give you some land and some opportunity." They got some opportunity. They did not get land, so they lived on houseboats for several centuries. Actually, my grandparents were actually the first of that family lineage that were able to move to dry ground after oil was discovered in that same waterway. My grandfather took a job with ExxonMobil and was able to move to dry land and put his kids through college. Um, and so my father,
He was also a
he
musician.
was also a really brilliant musician. He was a great musician.
What did he play? What was his thing?
He played guitar, and he played sort of, he was a big fan of Chet Atkins style uh, playing. Um, Most of the music that you could professionally get paid to do around here back in those days was either going to be country music or Cajun music, and so that's what my grandfather played. My father comes along, and I don't know, for whatever reason, he really gravitates towards jazz, and later on jazz fusion. And so by the time I came around, my father was, I would call him a bit of a snob musically, to be quite honest with you. We heard a lot of instrumental jazz in the house, guys like Chick Corea and bands like Weather Report and the Yellow Jackets. That was on heavy rotation in the house. Um, but he wanted to make money as a musician, and nobody around here is paying to hear jazz, especially jazz fusion. So he was in cover bands. There was one in particular from about 1990 to 1993 that's kind of been a revolving door party band since the 50s, a band called the Boogie Kings. They dress up in the white tails, tuxedos, and they play dance hall music. Around here, we call it swamp pop. It's really just you know blue-eyed soul. So it's guys that are singing, Otis Redding and Wilson Pickett and um, a bunch of really amazing music. And on the occasion that my dad had to learn a new song for the gig, those were the only times that I finally got to hear a singer in the house. And so I would run from the bedroom and say, "Who's this, Dad?" And he'd say, "This is Otis Redding, son." And I was completely and utterly floored by Otis's voice. Stevie Wonder was also on rotation occasionally in the house, and that definitely made its mark on me, no doubt about it. But yeah, Dad, he's a hell of a player. He and I still do between 5 and 10 shows a year together as a duo acoustic performance, which I love doing because we get to sit down and actually tell these stories essentially, and I get to pay him really well, and he loves my audience. They love him. He's a great guy, and I'm really very blessed to have been raised by him.
So you go on stage at the age of 5. You get the feel for singing. You work with your dad every so often when he gives you that opportunity. At what point do you think, I want to do this, or I'm good at this?
Really, honestly, I saw myself as going into a very similar role as him, and virtually every musician that I grew up knowing. These are guys that have day jobs that make money on the weekends to offset, the shortfalls of their day jobs. It wasn't until I was actually on tour opening for Maroon 5 in 2002 or 2003 that I realized that I could do it full time. It was never really in my mind that it would be a full time job, especially once I got my high school sweetheart pregnant, and I was completely under the impression that I was going to get a job working in the oil field, like a bunch of my friends down here have done. And then I would make music for weddings and office parties and Christmas parties. It really all came together quite quickly because in January 27th of 2002, I flew to Los Angeles for the first time ever at the behest of a woman named Leah Simon. She had spent most of her career in independent radio promo on the West Coast, and she had enough power to call up the heads of major labels on the West Coast while she was on her way to their office and say, "Hey, I've got this artist I want to introduce you to," and they would say, "Come on in." I mean, these are really high-powered guys like Lenny Waronker and Gary Gersh and Tom Wally, at the heads of every single major on the West Coast.
Can I ask,
Sure.
at that point, I mean, for her to believe in you to send you out to LA to meet with these record execs, she obviously saw something in you. What were you doing at that point? Like, I think you played in a Christian rock band at one
Yeah.
point.
That was
But I
done.
mean,
That was done by
leading
the.
up to that point,
Uh,
what did she see, or how did she see what you do to believe in you?
yeah, I was actually working in produce at a grocery store, and I'd gotten a call from an old friend who was managing a local rock band here in town, who asked me to come and open the show. And I hadn't played in a really long time. It had probably been close to a year that I had even played a show. And so I just showed up and decided to go ahead and play every song of mine in chronological order. Not a whole lot of thought going into that set list. Leah, had just recently opened a sushi restaurant right up the street from where I was playing that show. And her staff apparently was telling her that she needed to come and see me. She ended up missing my set. She showed up late night though, and I was still there. So I pulled her out to the parking lot and played her, I think, a couple of tunes. And she gave me her phone number and said, "Give me a call on Monday." That was right around Christmas time, maybe just after Christmas time. And I called her the following Monday, and she said, "I'm going to fly you out. I'm going to fly you out in a month." And so that was when I'll never forget the day I landed in Los Angeles. I'd really never been anywhere. I'd been on planes before, but not much. Maybe once or twice prior. I'd never been to the West Coast. And I land at LAX, and the weather's stunning. It's a beautiful day. And I call her, and she says, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm on the curb." And she says, "Look to your left." I'm in a black Denali, and then it's like slow motion, like out of a movie scene. It's gorgeous, super clean black Denali. Takes a right and pulls up to the curb in front of me, and she rolls down the window and she's like, "Hey, get in." And she had a gorgeous home up in the Palisades. It was just so surreal. And I really, truly looking back, I had no idea just how much stroke she really had. In retrospect, to call a guy like Tom Wally on the way to his office and have him say, "Sure, come on over." To call a guy like Lenny Waronker on the way to his office and say, "Sure, come over." That's that's more power than I have right now in the
I mean,
business.
you're 20 years old, so are you appreciating this? And
No,
do you know
no, I
your
was
own talent at that point? Like, do you have any idea what you bring to the table?
no, I was completely and utterly delusional. I thought I had arrived. I thought, this is my red carpet moment. Uh, yeah, I finally made it. Like, I'm gonna do this. Nobody's gonna be able to stop me because I'm that good. I thought I was gonna be bigger than Michael Jackson. I'm not even joking. I was that delusional. And um, I was scheduled to fly home on February 3rd. I called my mom and dad the night before on the second, and I had broken up with my girlfriend, my high school sweetheart. I had broken up with her about a month prior. And I called my mom and dad to tell them how great this week was. And my mom, at the end of the phone call, mentioned that my ex girlfriend, my now wife, she had called. She wanted me to call her. So I called her up, and she was just leaving the bathroom of a Walgreens pharmacy after having taken two pregnancy tests. And she tells me that she's pregnant for my first child. And immediately, like, the high of that week a meeting with those executives immediately came crashing down. I hung the phone up and literally just laid down and passed out. And I come down the next morning, and Leah and that fella that had actually called me to open for the band that he managed, they're both in the kitchen, and the sunlight is pouring in, and they're making coffee, and they're all happy and they're giddy about how well the week went. And I had to break some bad news. At least I thought it was bad news. I had to let them know that I was coming home to deal with a pregnant girlfriend, ex-girlfriend. And I immediately assumed that Leah was just gonna say, "Okay, well, this is done. I'm done." I made preparations, at least mentally, to come home and start looking for a job in the oil field, and rekindle the relationship with this girl, and settle down, get married, and spend my
So you
life
had
like
that
a.
all figured out.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent the whole plane ride assuming that this whole Michael Jackson journey was dead on arrival, and told my dad as much. When I got home, I'd let them know that we were pregnant for our first child, and that Leah was probably not going to be interested in moving forward with me. And my dad says, "Okay, well, look, I'm going to produce a record for you." So I called Leah up and I said, "Hey, thanks, but no thanks. Like, thank you for everything, but my dad said he's going to produce a record for me." And she kind of just like, I remember she says, "Okay, let's do it. I've got a producer. I'm going to fly him down and we'll make a record together. And I'm going to put your record out. I'll form a record label just for this release." And, no one on the West Coast bit, because I had like a 3-song acoustic demo tape. That was all I had. I hadn't really sold any tickets. I just didn't have any track record for those guys to see me as a marketable commodity. And so that none of them bit. That was in January of 2002. By September of 2002, I released my first album, Momentary Setback, about 9 days after my son was born. And by that point, I was signed to a management firm out of New York City. Island Def Jam had flown an A&R person down to that CD release party. And within the next 4 months, they had flown me to New York and signed me to a record deal. So it was like so quick. It all like high, low, and back up on top of the world again.
I'm just curious, how much gigging and performance background did you have at that point?
Not much. I mean, so as soon as I came home and my dad decided to make a record, and then Leah jumped on board, then everything was kind of back on, and I was motivated. So I put a band together and we started playing shows. And we had probably played 6 or 7 shows by the time that CD release had happened. And
Which isn't a lot.
that's not a lot, but I went from selling like 100 tickets to having more than 1,100 people walk through the door that night. And so it felt like a train that was just catching speed at a ridiculous pace. It felt like a rocket ship taking off by the time that album came out. And then by the end of that year, Island Def Jam had flown me out to New York, and I signed a record deal with them. um, they were on board with promoting the album that I had just put out for until I made my freshman effort for them. So they helped market that album, even though they didn't own it. And then my managers had a favor left over from a prior deal that they had done when they represented John Mayer. Uh, they had thrown Maroon 5 a bone and had them open for Mayer. And so Maroon 5 owed them a favor, and they took me out on tour in 2003 on their very first bus tour. Their album Songs for Jane was just a rocket ship at radio. And again, like it was just, there was so much momentum going into my freshman effort for Island Def Jam that I felt really confident that that dream of becoming bigger than Michael Jackson was still maybe within reach.
So you've done this for a while now. When you look back, and I don't know if you can look at it objectively, but that kid who's on the bus with Maroon 5 or on tour with Maroon 5, how good of a stage presence did he have? How good of a live performer was he?
Man, that's a good question. I listen back to my early albums, and I hear a young man that is trying very, very, very hard to sound like a big professional man, um, and I cringe a little bit. And thinking back on the way that that guy treated my wife, I would kick him right in the jaw right now. I would beat him to a pulp if I could. If I could get my hands on
Was
20-year
it
old.
because of ego or
Yeah, his ego was through the friggin' roof. It was absolutely unchecked and unhinged. And more importantly, I creatively was totally checked out because I had assumed that I had this whole team around me. I had this record label that had my best interests. I had a management firm that had my best interests. I had a really talented band around me. And so all I had to do was show up. I didn't really have to engage creatively because those things would just kind of come to me naturally. And my career suffered greatly as a result of that. After that initial peak, after that initial launch, it was a slow, dirty climb back down to reality. And by the time I finished up with my Atlantic record deal in 2010 or so, I was struggling greatly with regards to ticket sales, with regards to album sales. We were back down to, I was at one point I had a bus and a crew. Now we're back in a rented van playing shows at really tiny venues as a trio. It was a reality, a wake up call for me. And then I saw Prince live in Knoxville, Tennessee, back on the Musicology tour, and that I think was really the day that my ego truly died. Prince violently murdered my ego that day.
and so how does one deal with that? Like how do you deal with coming down from a big machine to traveling on for like traveling well with buses and all that to going back to vans and playing in smaller venues? How does that affect you as a musician?
Well, I think after my ego death, I realized that if I'm not carrying the football, nobody is. That I really did have to engage creatively because without without that, everything that I was doing just felt really inauthentic, and my audience connected with me in the beginning because uh, of some authenticity. And so I really needed to um, learn more about what it is that I was doing, learn more about the business itself, and then b just actually engage creatively. And so um, I started listening to more music and broadening my the range of music that I was taking in, because prior to that I would have called myself a musical snob. I was always kind of a snob when it comes to singers, and as a result, I think I left a lot of music off the table for a long, long time. Guys like Bob Dylan or even Robert Plant. I didn't, when I first heard Led Zeppelin, the music was okay, I guess, but Robert Plant's voice wasn't wasn't really up to par for me. Once my ego died, all of a sudden there was a whole new world of music that was starting to influence me. And uh, one of the most powerful influences at that time was a guy called Blake Mills. Blake's music was unlike anything I had ever heard. And had I encountered Blake's music at any point prior to that, I would have rejected it outright because he's not a singer. And yet his music touched me deeply. And all of a sudden, I had a much different idea of what I wanted to do musically. And so we made an album called A Life Worth Living. That was shortly after my grandmother passed away, which the song that I wrote upon hearing about her passing is the title track of that album. And it was a much different approach. We also made an album called Easy to Love around that same time. That was also a very, very different approach than everything that I had done prior to that.
The Life Worth Living, is that the one that you produced?
Uh, I would say that I had more production input on that album than any other of my career prior, especially. I don't think that I could technically be uh, billed as a producer on any of my albums, to be quite honest. So I've had to lean quite a bit on a lot of other people when it comes to making albums. I don't have a technical skill set when it comes to making records, so I wouldn't credit myself as a producer of any of them. But A Life Worth Living was definitely the one that I influenced more than any other. That was an album that was technically produced by a guy called Paul Moak. And again, it was just a totally different approach. My head was in a totally different space by the time we made that album, and with Easy to Love. And then somewhere around that, right after A Life Worth Living, before A Life Worth Living, I was trying to convince my managers that we could go independent. They were not convinced. So we signed A Life Worth Living to Vanguard Records. And by the end of that record cycle, my managers were finally convinced that we could go indie. So we got,
Can we talk about that a little bit?
yeah,
Just because it's, like in some ways things came very easy to you.
sure.
And I don't know if you look at it that way, but a lot of
Oh,
things
yeah.
happen very quickly. And then a lot of people would kill to have a major record label sign them. And you dealt with major labels more than once.
Yeah,
And it seems like a great thing. It seems like, well, going on tour for 2 years with Maroon 5 must be great and incredible. And I'm sure it
it
was,
was.
but I can also imagine that it could be very costly and expensive. And you don't walk away with amount of money that one would imagine,
Correct.
right? Like maybe walk away with debt. I
Yeah,
don't know, but
absolutely.
tell me about that experience of, how, in your mind, what did you think that major label experience would be like? And then what did you walk away, the fact that you thought, I want to be an independent, what made you decide that, and what advantages did you see in that?
So I've signed 4 record deals. My first was
Right.
Island Def Jam. The second was with Vanguard. After a deal with Concord Music broke down at the 11th hour, I was making a covers soul music covers album called SOS, Save Our Soul, and we were at the 11th hour in negotiations with Concord when they walked away, and Vanguard signed that deal sight unseen. They were just like, we one off, we'll give you more money than they will, and we just want to work with you. And that was a cool experience. Vanguard was a much smaller major, but it was a cool experience. And then I signed again with Atlantic Records. So I was signed at Island Def Jam when Leor Cohen was the CEO. I signed a deal at Vanguard, and then I signed again at Atlantic when Leor Cohen was the CEO of Atlantic. So I've only dealt with 2 different groups, to be quite honest,
Right.
because after Atlantic, I signed with Vanguard again. So it's really just 2 groups of this, like the same people that I've signed with 4 different times. And in my experience and in the experience of virtually every friend of mine in this business that's ever signed a record deal, if you ask an artist in the first 6 months after they sign a record deal, hey, how's it going? They always say the same thing. Oh man, it's great. Love it. It's so good. They treat me like a king. You ask them 2 years down the road, hey, how's it going? Oh man, it's bad. It's so bad. We're looking for the exit. I I don't think I don't think that I know of a single experience with an artist that's not massively successful that's not the case. It's virtually ubiquitous across artists at my level and just above and certainly below. I just figured it can't be that hard to release an album. We can find a distributor that's willing to work with us. We can release as much music as we want to. We don't have to compete with the other artists on the label. with regards to releasing music, because inevitably I'd make a record for somebody like Atlantic, and I'd say, I really want this album to come out before my fall tour. Can we put it out in September? And they say, oh no, we got Beyonce's album coming out in September, and we've also got this other series of albums coming out in September. It's just not within our bandwidth to put it out. And so inevitably my schedules would have to, would have to bend the knee to these other artists on the label. And I just figured, like, that's a weird way to do business as an artist. I want to put out more music more often, and the biggest challenge that we have is on the financial side when it comes to making these albums. So let's find ways to reduce our production costs as close to zero as we possibly can, and let's give it a shot. And the first indie record that we made was uh, the Christmas album, and I actually got money from both of my managers and my drummer. Each one of them put up $5,000, and within 6 months, I paid them back each $7,500, and they were all everybody was in at that point. Like, they had any doubts prior to that, those doubts were completely gone by the time by the time 6 months after that release, and we were off to the races.
One of the advantages of being with a major would be that they're pouring money into it, which is ultimately your money, but they're pouring money into you for promotion and radio play and everything, getting your name out there. Do you feel that your name got out there enough through their efforts, or do you think if you hadn't ever signed to a major label, you'd be in the same spot?
Oh no, I'm very grateful to Island Def Jam and that first effort. Karen Crow put me on the map. I don't think I would have a career without my first album at Island Def Jam. The subsequent albums, SOS actually with Vanguard was more successful than I had anticipated it to be. It was an album that got us over to Europe for the first time. It got picked up by a Dutch label that I'm still with to this day. Um, so I am grateful for those early marketing efforts. But the calculus on a record deal is just so weighted against the artist that it's virtually impossible to ever recoup the money that they invested in me. And again, I'd have to audit them to find out if they're actually telling me the truth about what they spent. So at the end of the day, they can manipulate those numbers in perpetuity. They could say, "Oh, we've got ongoing marketing efforts that mean that you haven't recouped," um, and so it just it was no longer an attractive idea to stick around with major labels, to deal with the extra cooks in the kitchen, to deal with people that have no experience whatsoever in any capacity playing an instrument or singing at all, trying to tell me what I should be singing and playing. Those were really frustrating times, and to listen to an executive say, "Hey, I know you just got in the studio and made this album, but we think it's too urban, so we're not going to release it." All of that stuff kind of culminated in me just being totally over being signed to a record label, and all I had to do was convince my managers that they needed to put in a little extra effort to make sure that these releases were up to par, up to snuff, that things would be listed correctly, and whatever, that we would have the artwork done properly and whatnot. But ultimately, we just needed to sign with a distributor that would take care of a lot of that stuff on our behalf, and that's what we did. So once the success of that first Christmas project was underfoot, um, everybody on the team was ready to go.
So I want to talk about the SOS albums because it's interesting. In a way, um, the first album happened because of a conflict with the record company
Right.
that they didn't want to release your second album with them, and also that meant that you couldn't release anything for a number of years.
Well, it meant that I couldn't go record that album, but I
Right.
couldn't
Oh, songs
re-record
from that
that
album.
album. I had a 8-year re-record clause that prevented me from recording anything that I had made for them again. So instead of going, and at the time, my writing process was very different than it is now. There wasn't the same sense of urgency that I have these days. And so it was a very long, drawn out process. So I might fly to Los Angeles for a week and spend a week in different writers' rooms with different writers. I might fly to Nashville for another week, but they wouldn't be consecutive weeks. And so we didn't really feel like we had the time to go out and enter a new writing process. And somebody suggested, let's make a covers album. And we all kind of agreed that it was a good idea. That first SOS was really done out of necessity, out of real desperation, to be quite honest, because show promoters like knowing that there's other promotional energy going into a tour. And it had been 2.5 years since I had released Karen Crow. There's no more promo energy behind that album, and we started, just not getting calls to get booked. We started getting rejections by, when my booking agent would call and try to book something, and so we needed a new instrument, a new promotional tool to sort of wet the whistle, to bait the hook so that we could get back on tour, because that's where we all made money. We never made money selling records. We only made money when we were touring, and it worked. It worked like a charm. It got me back in the game, and then it was actually Kevin Welk, who was the CEO of Vanguard, that told me a story that he was at a golf tournament for CEOs in the music business, and he was in the clubhouse talking with a mutual friend of ours, a guy that ran VH1 called Rick Krem, that I'd known because of Leah Seymour. Leah introduced me to Rick Krem way back in the day. And Rick was a big fan of mine. He had put my song Home on CMT and VH1, I believe. And he's asking Kevin Welk, hey, how's it going with this deal with Marc? Is it good? And Kevin's like, oh man, it's so good. The record's doing great. We really want to sign him to a subsequent deal. Well, Leor Cohen, who was the former CEO of Island Def Jam, current CEO of Atlantic Records at the time, he walks in and overhears this conversation. And according to Kevin Welk, Leor calls his business affairs department on the spot and says, draw up the paperwork. And Kevin looks over and says, oh shit. He said, I knew that we weren't going to be able to sign you to a subsequent deal because Leor was about to throw the house at you. And they did. They threw the house at me. I ended up signing that deal with Atlantic. I also signed a publishing deal that totaled just under, no, just over $750,000, which is just an
Wow.
insane amount of money. Just an insane amount of money that I ended up losing. We spent a lot of it making an album. What I had left over, I ended up investing in the stock market with a broker here in town. That was in January of 2008. The market
Oh.
crapped the bed. That broker ended up in prison over his shady dealings.
Hmm.
So yeah, I didn't walk away with anything from that deal.
Wow. I want to talk about that SOS album because it's not only an album of covers, but it's also an album for
Yeah,
charity. And you have a long history of charity. You did relief funds for Hurricane Katrina,
sure.
and then you find causes, and you've gone on to record, I think, 5 SOS albums.
Yeah, we just put out number 5 in February of this year.
And so you said that the first one was great because it opened up a lot of opportunities. Your management really didn't think it was a good idea, but it turned out to be a really good idea, and it
Well,
certainly helped you.
so SOS one, let me be clear. SOS one was not a charity project. That was a project.
Oh,
That
okay.
was a charity project for yours truly. We needed to get
Right.
back on tour. Uh, it was a project out of necessity. It wasn't until I went independent that I told management I think we should start making these charity albums, these charity covers albums, and they were like, "You don't have money to make. You don't have money to give away. What are you talking about?" And I was like, I think it's going to work. I think it's going to be a good idea.
What made you think that? And what did you think?
I don't know. I
Why?
can't tell you what the impetus was outside of just a deep desire to encourage fans to engage with this dying medium that's called albums. Uh, by that point, CDs, like, almost no one had CD players in their cars anymore. Um, but I wanted to encourage my fans to continue to engage with purchasing albums, leaving my shows with something in their hands. And I figured the best way to do that was to make it a philanthropic endeavor. And more importantly, I wanted to build philanthropy in. I wanted to build a philanthropic mechanism into my business, that I wanted to just have it baked in. And what I didn't realize at the time was just how rewarding the entire thing would be for me. I assumed that we were going to be raising really great money for various charitable causes, and I assumed that we would be able to record some of our favorite music. What I didn't realize was that it would be a vehicle that would allow me to put out more music more often, that it would give me more time in between original projects to really home in on the best writing that I could do, on top of raising tens of thousands of dollars for charitable causes that I'm passionate about. I've always been passionate about charity. My wife and I volunteered for an organization here locally for a very long time, for close to 20 years, that's got a really broad mission. And in fact, it's the charity that the latest SOS is benefiting. So a group called Love of People that does toy drives, diaper drives, food drives all year long. We hire aging musicians in the area to play a monthly concert series. And through that, they get, not only do they get paid well, but they also get access to some concierge life services, things like trips to the doctor's office and even up to hospice care. Um, and so we fed something like 5,000 people last Thanksgiving. So my wife and I have always been, very, very conscious about our role in this community, and very adamant that, especially me, I've always been very adamant that if I can affect something, if I can put my hands on something and make that situation better, I'm going to do it. I'm not a huge fan of outsourcing when I can actually do something on my own. And so that's what we've done. We've just baked philanthropy into the business.
I have to ask, with the music business being the way it is and how much it's changed, and CD sales and record sales being very different from what it was before, does something like that, does the SOS projects, are you still able to raise enough money because it's a good cause, when people aren't buying CDs, or
No, that's the thing, is
is
my
that
fans leave the shows with those albums, not just because they like the covers that we've recorded on it, but because they know that it's going to a great cause. We have certainly raised tens of thousands of dollars on every single one of these projects. Cry to Me on SOS 2 is arguably the most successful song that I've ever had. So yeah, it's been wildly more successful than I ever really anticipated. I knew that it was going to work. I just did not think that it was going to be this successful.
okay? I want to go back to your dad for a moment,
Sure.
who obviously introduced you to music and who probably helped you along the way many, many times. You play with him, you said maybe 10 times a year. When did that relationship with your dad become? I mean, I don't know if it becomes this, but at what point is it musician to musician as opposed to father to son?
That was pretty early on. He started bringing me to a songwriters night in Lafayette when I was about 16. And it was a place called Sidebar, downtown Lafayette. And I was the only kid there. And it was, all these folk songwriters that would get up and play their songs. And then I'd get up and do my, at the time, was sort of James Taylor-esque kind of tunes that I was writing. And the owner of the place took a shine to me and said, "Hey, you guys want to put a band together and start doing Friday nights here?" And so we did. We would make, I was making at 16, 17, 18 years old, I was making 400 or 500 bucks on a Friday night. Every Friday night, I thought I was making it. You know what I mean? I thought I was rich. Little did I know that my dad was not paying himself. He was giving me his share. But really, once I was on tour, once I was doing music full time, he he had he's always had a lot of respect for my skills. But he certainly started treating me more like a peer once I became a professional musician full time.
Is he a singer as well?
Yeah, he's a great singer. In fact, some of my favorite footage, concert footage of all time, he had a band in the late 80s called Ted Broussard and Uptown Express that had a three-piece horn section, a female lead singer, and him playing guitar and and singing vocals as well. The drums, bass, and keys were all programmed on an Atari computer that he had on stage, and he would start every song with a space bar. This was so ahead of its time. Okay, it's ridiculously ahead of its time. And they were doing top 40 hits. They were doing "The Way You Make Me Feel" by Mike Jackson, and "September" by Earth, Wind and Fire, and "Boogie Down" by Al Jarreau, and even a bit of Steely Dan. And the footage I've got in my Dropbox folder right now, he's actually got an extra horn player on the gig and a percussionist on the gig, and the band is slaying it because he's using the same instruments that they were using on the top 40 hits. It's a Yamaha, Roland drum machine, SY-77 keyboard, a DX7 keyboard. These are the exact same instruments and machines that Mike Jackson is using in the studio. So the band sounds like the radio. And there's a concert series that goes on here in Lafayette every spring and fall called Downtown Alive. And especially back then, it was dominated by Zydeco and Cajun bands. And it was really well attended. There was probably 2 or 3 thousand people in the audience. And then my dad shows up, and it ain't Zydeco or Cajun at all. And there's 3,000 people in the audience. The band is slaying it, and everybody but the kids are got their arms folded in the crowd. It's so bad that after the first song, the saxophone player gets on the mic and says, "Test, test," as if the audience hadn't heard him. It's amazing footage, but my dad is crushing it. He's playing his butt off, and he really is a great singer.
This is probably a hard question to answer, but what do you think is the greatest thing he's taught you about music?
Well, um, more than anything, I remember being side stage for this one performance when he was in the Boogie Kings. Because he would come down the song before I would get up and sing. He would come and kind of let me know, "Hey, you're about to get up." And there was another singer, there was a guest vocalist on stage at the time who's a phenomenal singer. This guy was lights out. And he comes down side stage, and I said, "Dad, that man is a really good singer." And he tells me a story right then and there about how the guy had gotten an offer to go front Chicago and walked into the manager's office and put his boots on the guy's desk and was immediately dismissed.
Oh,
There were little anecdotes like that that he would whisper in my ear. I'd say, "Oh, Dad, that guy's a really good singer." "Yeah, son, but he's got a real serious alcohol addiction. You really need to guard against addiction in this business because it's around all the time." Those are the little anecdotes that really have helped me keep my head above water more than anything. He gave me a moral compass and set my shoulders straight.
I mean, it's obvious to me you have a great voice. I don't know how you feel about your voice, or like if I was to ask, what's it like to sing like you, or what do you think about your voice? What would you tell me?
I would say that it's a lot of fun to be able to sing well. It's a lot of fun. Um, I just got back from a trip to play with Joe Bonamassa down in Florida. It was a whole weekend full of music with a bunch of different bands, and you know, I just have a lot of respect for my peers, and that feels very good. It feels really, really, really good to have that level of respect where I can just kind of walk into any room or walk onto any stage and feel very confident that I'm going to make a lasting impression, not only on the audience, but also everybody on stage. I would say that one of the most rewarding episodes of my career was getting to sit in with the original Meters a few years ago during Jazz Fest.
Wow.
Those guys hadn't played together in a really long time. And it was one of the last shows that they had ever played together before Art Neville passed away. I was the only guest on the show, and it was because George Porter likes me and sent me a picture of the set list about 4 hours before the show and said, "What song you want to sit in on?" I chose to sit in on a song called "Ain't No Use" that I had sung before a handful of times, and that I felt really good about my version. I take some liberties for sure, and I'll never forget. So the Meters, for those of you who don't know, the Meters are like the Rolling Stones of Louisiana. They're by far the most highly regarded band that has ever come out of Louisiana, and to get invited to sit in with the original lineup, especially, is about as high an accolade as you can get. And me being the only other guest on the show that has never been in the band was also just kind of mind stirring. And I sing the song and I crush it. I sing it really, really well. And as I'm walking off, Zigaboo Modaliste, the drummer, who's the best singer in the band, uh, I'm walking away and he gets on the microphone and he says to the crowd, he says, "Wow, that young man can sing." And it's just like the highest of the highs that I've ever felt. I remember um, doing a Wilson Pickett tribute for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. I got to sing Mustang Sally. And after I'm done, I'm standing on the stage looking out at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I'm scanning the room like a fly on the wall, and I see nobody notices me. I'm just scanning the room until I lock eyes with Sting. He's been waiting for me to see him, and as soon as we lock eyes, he throws me the biggest thumbs up I've ever seen, the most enthusiastic thumbs up. So it's those little moments that are the most rewarding as a vocalist. Really, really special moments. But to be quite honest, man, uh, I don't know what it's not like to sing like this, you know, so I don't really have a frame of reference.
At what point, and I asked this to a lot of classical musicians, singers, where because of what they do, they, the voice is really important, and how they treat the voice and the instrument is really important. I don't know if all this comes naturally to you, or do you have to work at it and make sure you do your warm ups and
Oh yeah.
eat right and sleep right.
I
When did you find that out? That this was an instrument more than just a gift?
I treated it very poorly for a long time. I didn't warm up. I would sleep right up until showtime. Um I have never really had much discipline with regards to my health. But there was a few years ago when I was on tour and I had like 6 shows in a row and I had just shredded my voice. And I called up my buddy JJ Gray, who he had talked to me about a vocal coach. And I've worked with various vocal coaches over the years. They're all really weird. It's a very odd person that goes into that job. I don't know why. Maybe not all of them. Certainly not all of them, because my current vocal coach is not a weird guy. I like him a lot. Um, but JJ tells me about this guy in Boston, and I happen to be playing Boston that day. And sure enough, I call the guy up, a guy named Marc Baxter. Call him up, and I'm like, I need help bad. He had an opening. I go to his house. I spend about an hour working with him. He gives me two exercises that get me back to show form. And I said, okay, was this just recovery, or is this stuff that I can use every day? And he says, no, 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 you should use these every day. And I say, okay, well, you've got a bunch of other stuff on your website, a bunch of videos. Should I go and maybe work on some of that stuff? And he's like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know, like some other vocal fry videos and whatnot. He's like, no, don't worry about it. These two exercises are the only thing you need. And he wasn't wrong. It's the best $150 I ever spent in my life. So I spend about an hour before each show warming up with these two exercises over and over and over again, quietly. When I used to warm up, when I first started warming up, I found this Australian vocal coach on YouTube that had a bunch of different stuff. And really, in all honesty, those things are for classical singers. They're not for a rock and roll singer. Marc Baxter disabused me of those exercises, gave me two of the most powerful tools that I've ever had in this business, and they've carried me through to this day. So it does get a little weird on tour. I still get fatigued, certainly, but there's a weird switch that happens. I lose power but gain vocal range. It happens probably about a week and a half into a tour,
Oh.
and there's just no avoiding it. Like either I tell management to book two shows and then 2 days off, or we go out and we hustle and work, and I go through the strain of the change and make some money.
This is going to be a weird question, but having a voice and a great voice, a singing voice, is one thing, but it only really works if you have a great song, I think.
I agree.
I don't know, you said you were writing and you were going to songwriters thing circles and things. Was there a moment where you might have written something and realized that what you're writing matched your voice, or what you were writing was where you wanted to be as a singer songwriter? Like, I think of the song Lonely Night in Georgia,
Yeah.
which I think is a stunning song.
Thank you.
And you have others, but that particular song I think is beautiful. I don't know when you recorded it, you thought, this is who I am, or before that. Like, was there a moment where you recorded something and thought, this really is the song that captures who I am?
Certainly. Most of that album, Karen Crow, I think really showcases what I do well. I felt very, very confident that Home was a wonderful display of what I could do. But honestly, on that album, I would say Let Me Leave is the standout vocal. Um, on Momentary Setback, there's a song called Gotta Be More that I'm just I'm just blowing it out at the end, especially. I'm at the very, very limits of my ability. Um, the covers albums, honestly, have given me almost probably more opportunities to showcase the best of my abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because I've lived with those songs so much longer than I have with the original material. When I make an album, I'm cutting a song within 6 months of writing it. So I haven't really lived and immersed myself in those songs quite as much as I have with a Donny Hathaway tune, or an Al Green tune, or an Otis Redding song. So I have a more intimate relationship with some of those songs than I do with my own music. So yeah, when it comes to writing, I always try my best to write a melody that's gonna serve me really well, and I think I do that fairly well. With the new album, I think I did it probably better than. Well, my wife claims that it's the best album of my career.
Nice.
There are moments. There are moments that we're, when she's listened to one of the tunes from the new album, that she's like, "Oh my God, I love when you do that." So I'm very, very, very excited about this album.
Tell me about the album. Tell me what it's called. I know it's coming out April 17th, which would be a few weeks ago,
Yeah,
based on when this is being released. But tell me about the genesis of this album and
sure. Well, Joe Bonamassa and I put a record out, covers blues album a few years ago, SOS 4, and we had so much fun making that record. Also, Joe's bass player is one of my best friends. He was my first side man ever. He's been one of my closest friends for the last 25 years now.
he got you together with Joe, did he not?
He did. So yeah, he's kind of the impetus on this whole Joe Bonamassa blues venture. And as soon as we were done with the SOS 4, Calvin, Joe's bass player, was like, "Dude, we got to do an original now. We got to do an original." So he kept pushing the issue all the time, and I finally was like, "Okay, let's write it then. Let's me and you just write it." Because Calvin is a freak arranger. He's a phenomenal arranger. And so he took about 3 days to put together some instrumental demos, really well fleshed out, with drum programming and some guitars and some keys and whatnot. Demo, but good quality demo, and sent me a folder of about 15 instrumentals. And I sat here in this room right here for 3 days straight, from dawn until dusk. I was a madman, and in 3 days, I wrote 13 of those 15.
Wow.
It was nuts. It was absolutely insane. I've never gone through a period where I was that locked in on lyric writing. But I also discovered something in the recent past with regards to my lyric writing, my songwriting, and that's that when I'm alone, historically I would hit a wall at like 45 minutes to an hour in. And I'm for the entirety of my career, I would just stop there and I would hang it up, and I'd leave it for a later date when I'm sitting in a room with somebody else or whatever. What I discovered on a record that I did with Eric Krasno a few years ago called "Time Is a Thief" is that if I just push through the wall, that the rest of the tune generally comes fairly quickly within the next 15 or 20 minutes. And so that's the tool that I employed for this project. Every time I hit the wall, I might get up and go get a drink of water or something, but I come back and I sit down and I push through the wall. And so it's certainly the most prolific period of writing of my career. 3 days, 13 songs is kind of still mind blowing to me, but it was so much fun. And then I would sing the tune, and then I would send it to Calvin, and he'd be like, "Yeah, that's killer. What's next?" And I'd play it for my wife. And there's one of those tunes called "These Walls" that she listened to 50 times in a row every single day after I wrote it.
Wow.
She'd sit on this patio right here, smoking cigarettes, drinking beers, and just listening to the song over and over and over and over again. And I come outside, she said, "Oh my God, this is the best song you've ever written. Oh my God." So it's a very exciting project. It's me certainly moving into new territory with regards to the blues. I feel like the blues has always been in my wheelhouse, but it's not really my area of expertise. So it's a new journey. The album's called "Chance Worth Taking," partially for that reason. It's a new journey into the blues. So I hope the fans like it when they hear it.
My final question to you. Of all the things you do, whether it be writing, singing, recording, performing, or anything else, what is the favorite thing you do musically?
Hmm. I mean, singing certainly has to be the best. It's still so surreal for me to step onto a stage. Like, imagine uh, a mechanic who shows up to work and 200 people are standing there doing woo. He hadn't done anything. He hadn't picked up a wrench yet, and 200 people are there just cheering their butts off. it's so surreal to walk into a room having done absolutely nothing and having a room full of people just freak out. It's um, it's the best job in the world. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Even with all the ups and downs.
Certainly, yeah. You know, the time spent away from family, um, but when I'm home, I'm home. So I might have to go away for a month. But when I'm home, I got nothing else to do. I can bring my daughter to school every day and pick her up every day. Uh, you know, it's the best job in the world. There's just no doubt about it.
Mark, it's a real pleasure meeting you. As I said to you before, there are times when I get introduced to artists that I don't know, and unfortunately, fortunately, you happen to be one of them. And I had heard your name, but having had the chance to listen to a lot of your music over the last week, I'm just amazed at your voice and your music. So, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Marco. I really appreciate you taking the time.